college, he asked me a question which I couldn't answer. I believe at the time he was studying genetics, and the question dealt with where did we come from, meaning not in the terms of where were we born, that is to say, where did we live in Russia before I became conscious of my existence in Russia as a boy. I couldn't answer him because my memory goes back to when I was a young boy in the town of Lelsitz, and at that time my memory goes back only as far as approximately the time when I was only 10 years old. I had always lived, as far as my memory goes back, to the town of Lelsitz, although personally I was born in Kiev. But it seems that my grandfather came from some small town near the town of Lelsitz. My mother came from Odessa. I was born in Kiev. So all told, we must have come from the northern part of Russia, with the exception of Odessa, which is in the slightly southern part of Russia. Just how we came to be at Lelsitz, I don't know. From what I understand, our grandparents, my father's parents, my grandfather, and his grandfather, his father's grandfather before him, designed mills, cut lumber for the local towns and barons and so forth, and ultimately they gravitated to where we were. Prior to coming to Lelsitz, which was a big town compared to the towns where they came from, I don't know where they were. No one ever told me. I wasn't curious at that time to learn. Maybe Javi and Michi could know, possibly. The purpose of this tape is that in the event our grandchildren might ask their Judy or Richard, as the case may be, where did their parents come from, their grandparents come from. Let me leave this bit of information as I recall it. The town of Lelsitz, where we lived before we came to the United States, is a small village. I will try to describe it as one might describe it in a novel. There was a main street. At the head of the main street was the Greek Catholic Church. Off to one side and a little bit hidden behind the woods was I believe what they called a Polish church, but I think it was more of a Protestant type church, or it may have been a Catholic church of another denomination. Still facing the church, off to the right and way over to the right, was the synagogue, which ultimately burnt. Adjacent to the synagogue and crossing over a little pond was a watermill, which was built by my grandfather and my uncles. Following that same road around the street, around to the right, we continued going through a street. Streets had no names because the town was small. To the left, as you passed it, was we called the swamps, where we used to take the geese for pasturing, and we as children used to make rafts out of lumber which was in the water. And we continued that way. There were small houses, small gardens, and we coming around to the right, we would come to where our house was. Let's go back to the head of the street where the church was standing. We'll turn around and go the other way. Walking in the opposite direction, it's still a wide street. Off to the right was the post office, or, well, for that matter, was the central office where all the legal work was done. That is to say, the post office, the telegraph office, and various offices for officials who ran the village. We continue walking in the same direction. They still have some very small houses, small shops. The shops would be called general stores because what they sold was oil, kerosene. Oh, incidentally, electricity we did not know about. There was no electricity in the town. We continue along the same line. I remember we had a house that belonged to an uncle of mine. Beyond that was really very few houses, but at the end of the street was the hospital. Also on the same street was a beautiful house which was owned by one of the Jews living in the town who had the franchise to bring the mail to the town from some neighboring village. Where it came from, I don't know. I do remember he always had a beautiful black carriage and pair of black spanking horses in a beautiful harness. And going back down the street, turn right, again we come to our house, passing gardens on either side, and as you notice, there were more gardens than, as many gardens as homes. We also passed the house, as I recall it, where a brother of my grandfather lived, where his children used to go to cheder at night in wintertime. The house was heated by a not a chimney, but yes, a triangular chimney hanging on wires punched through the roof, on which we put on pieces of wood which gave both light and heat, most of which went up through the roof. Before we reached our house was another garden, and now we come back to our own house. We had to get into the house, we had a yard which led into an outdoor toilet and a stable. The house was to the left, not of the stable, but before you reached the stable. My father, when he lived there, had even built an indoor facility to be used as a toilet. That is to say, instead of going outside at night to the outhouse, you walked into this little cabinet to do what you had to do. Inside the house, as we walked in, was the stove, which in itself requires a description which I don't even know how to begin. Because in this stove, which was used in wintertime, we place for the chickens to be kept warm. The cooking facility was best described like a fireplace on top of a level cement piece of level, under which was really the opening where the chickens were, just described. The inside of the oven was like a fireplace. The wood was placed in front of the opening and a little to the inside, so that when the draft the heat developed a heat pocket inside the oven and heated the bricks, and some of the excess smoke and heat came out through the front and up through the chimney. Wintertime, we as children, I remember, used to sit on top of the stove because then it was warm. We had no other heat inside the house except the ruba, which is another room, and certainly didn't give off any heat, mainly more light. Beyond that was the kitchen where we ate, was a table. Winter time, we used to sit there with kerosene lamp, plucking feathers to make the pillows, eating frozen cranberries, pickles, or whatever else was available in those days. We had a dining room, or rather large eating room, and that was a beautiful room to me. My father had collected many beautiful things which he kept in a special cabinet. Also, in that same room, we had a beautiful carved mantel. I wouldn't say a mantelpiece, but it was a two-piece thing. Maybe it'll come back to me later. I'll try. Grandfather's house. And the inside of the house was not much different than what we had. In that house, by the way, Elsie was born, and also her mother lived there, of course, my grandmother who lived there. Beyond that, I remember, was a garden. Our stables, we had a cow, I think. We also had geese. It was typically a farm type of life. We're going back for a moment to the stove or oven or whatever you want to call it. You must remember, I just want to repeat one thing, that we had no electricity, there was no gas, no such thing as gas, and the stove or oven, whatever you want to call it, bears a little more comment. The cooking was done in a very, very odd manner. The pots that my mother used were made of cast iron. No aluminum, of course, there was nothing like that, or any other type of vessels, cooking vessels that you're familiar with, copper or anything else. The pots were moved in and out of the stove, and also in relation to the heat, with a pitchfork type of thing, that is a handle, again, on top of which was a U-shaped pair of prongs, which were used to lift and move these metal pots when they were done or about to be heated. Also, you must have heard the word cholent. The cholent became a necessary or an accidental result of the type of stoves that we up north had. On Friday particularly, as I remember, and I'm going back a little bit, we used to go, Uncle Abe, Bax, and I as a child, and don't forget at that time I was no more than maybe 7, 8, or 9 years old, we used to go out Friday mornings to catch little fish. These little fishes my mother used to fry for us for lunch and breakfast. Also she used to make platzlach for us, like, somebody will explain it to you what they are. In the afternoon, we would go to the schwitzbad, to the bathhouse. That was almost a ritual where we finally got real clean and lots of hot water. But to get back to the stove, which is why I went back to this point, the cooking was done Friday afternoon. and the Shabbat was the day that we had to observe very religiously. So when the cooking was done, in order to keep it warm, because no cooking was done on the Sabbath or Saturday the following day, the food cooked in their pots would be shoved inside this fireplace thing I described above, before a wooden cover was then placed over the opening of this so-called fireplace thing that I described. And to keep the heat sealed in, my mother used to take rags, wet them, and cover this wooden cover on the edges so that no heat would escape from the inside of the stove. And all the food would simmer inside that heat all for the rest of the day, Friday night, and Saturday or Sabbath when we came back from shul. It would be open hot. In the meantime, you can imagine the taste that developed when all the beautiful goose or meat, whatever, chicken, whatever was there at the time. By the way, we used very little meat, because only once in a while would the butcher slaughter a calf or a cow, and by the time he distributed the meat to the entire town, it was all gone and very little of it was left. But we always had chicken or goose, for the Friday Sabbath food. And all this delicious meat or chicken or goose, as I said before, simmering with its beans and potatoes for almost 24 hours. And that was the thing that we used to call cholent. Friday, to go back to Friday itself, that was a very lovely day. After coming back from the bathhouse, the ritual bath, we'd get dressed in our best clothes, and the three of us, Uncle Max, Abe, myself, my mother, would go to shul, walk. There was a short walk down a block. And I remember coming home at night in the dark, because as I said before, electricity was not, the town was not electrified. And as you walk through the town, and all you can see is windows from the Gentiles, some non-Jews and Jews, just lighting the windows, and you walk through the town. And I remember it was an awesome sort of a thing. Wintertime, it was even worse, because we used to trudge with snow up to our knees, and with the cold, crisp snow used to crunch like broken glass under your feet. Thinking of it back, it was dramatic in a way, but I don't know that we appreciate it as one might now in retrospect. And this is, I remember as a child, about the town. I remember many other things which I don't know where to place, but I do anything that I may have forgotten. I'm sure that I can get Uncle Abe or Javi or Max to add to these things and see what they remember. I'm going back many, many years, and I will call them just things I remember. I remember as a very, very small child, our having taken a trip to a town called Wazir. I remember going on a small ferry boat, I suppose, or a small boat anyway, dressed with a typical sailor suit. I remember in Mozire that the house we visited was an uncle of somebody, whether it belonged to my mother's side or father's side, I don't remember. But I do remember that in Mozire, remember seeing the earliest type of automobiles. You've seen them in television where they're running on batteries and bicycle-type wheels running through the towns. Not too many of them, but they were there at that time. Now, as I said before, I was possibly at that time maybe 5, 6 years old, maybe younger, maybe a year older, no, not much more than that. And we're going back to about 65 years. And you've got an idea how far back I am to draw on my memory to give you some idea. I remember, what do I remember? I must go back to Lelsitz. Those are the things I remember most vividly, of course. I remember playing with children of my own age, going to various orchards and stealing apples and pears and plums. I remember one incident. We had a galach, or the Catholic priest, Greek Catholic priest. He was a little short man. I don't know whether it was a good galach or a bad one. But we as children saw him at a distance, and we said something derogatory. He heard it and came running after us, and we hid under the house. I remember him coming into the house, and I don't know whether he knew we were there and he was just being authoritative and threatened us, or whether he was really angry, but we were frightened as anything. I also remember that I wasn't a good student, never took to studies well. And I remember my sister used to come to Cheder and drop pieces of candy over my head as an indication that there was an angel overhead. If I did something good, I could get more candy. Silly stuff, but I knew it wasn't an angel. I knew it was my sister. Nevertheless, I still couldn't absorb the Cheder. I remember being slapped with a ruler by the rabbi if I didn't daven well enough. Don't forget, at that I was still only 6 or 7 years old. I also remember the holidays, of course, were something in themselves to be described. Only if you put your imagination back into a small town when there is Lag BaOmer and Simchas Torah and Sukkot, and all the holidays were very carefully observed because that was our way of life at that time. I remember the Russian Revolution. I didn't know too much about it, but we do know one thing, that the peasants got up in revolt wherever they did, but ultimately the revolt reached our town. And there was let's call him a baron, who owned the town. As a matter of fact, that was the home of this so-called baron, and Javi, my sister, and a girlfriend whose father supervised some of the log cuttings of the forest for this baron, got their education. The son of this baron used to teach them history, grammar, mathematics. And by the way, just as an afterthought, our town did not own a motor vehicle, an automobile. Although we had seen automobiles in Mozire, in Lelsitz we had no automobile. But we did have a bicycle, and that was owned by the son of one of this baron. It was a beautiful thing in my eyes at that time. I'm trying to go back to many little incidents that happened during that same period, small things which would color the existence. It doesn't come to mind now, it may come back to mind later on. One of the things that, in connection with the revolution, that did come up, and that was just an exciting thing. I remember we were in Cheder. It was a summer day, early summer. My mother had been going in that street towards the hospital. Where she was going, I really don't know. But she noticed an uprising of a lot of peasants from other towns who were coming into our town carrying scythes, hammers, axes to kill the Jews. I don't think they knew why they wanted to do it, but it was the thing to do at the time. Also, they were after one man who was selling salt. Salt was always a rare commodity, and apparently he must have been overcharging or holding out on salt. I bring it up now because it comes up later. When she saw these peasants coming into the town, she turned around and ran the other way, and alerted most of the people in town. And as they came out, let's say from the east side of town, we ran out through the west side of town and hid among the trees in the forest just outside of town, maybe 2-3 miles out. I think we stayed there for 24 hours or not much more. And after I guess these peasants who got over their anger and their excitement subsided, we came back to town. And we learned then that this man who had some monopoly on distribution or sale of salt was seized by these peasants, tied to a pole, and they tried with their scythes and sickles to cut his head off. Well, you can imagine what an awkward thing these scythes are. They made several swipes at him, missed his head, and gave up, whether they thought they had given up in disgust or, whatever the case may be. From that point on, things became, the town itself changed in that we had revolutionary soldiers would come into the town, forage for food, stay, go somewhere else. We had Chinese prisoners who were brought in by Russian soldiers to do work in the town for various people, and they were a novelty to us with their queues, pigtails, and their typical Chinese dress. We had Tartars and all sorts of various military type of people. We had soldiers from privateers, let's say a group called the Kerensky soldiers. Kerensky was a military figurehead, put up a group of soldiers, and he was going to take over Russia. They stayed in that town, they distributed money. As a matter of fact, I believe Kerensky died here in the United States some years ago. I remember that we had, I'd seen biscuits which were issued, Unita biscuits. Somehow it seeped down to many of these marauding soldiers. At about that time, Poland also became involved in the revolutionary stage. village situations settled nowheres without any connections to any major sewer system or water system. We did have a lake running in front of around the town, which is where we had our water mill, which my grandfather had installed, and I'll go back to that as it comes in again, because that's where we played as children. But we did have a water well, which many people, I think it was owned by one of the men, or one of the non-Jews in the town. We drew water there, and I suppose we paid him for the use of the water. That is to say, every so often as water was needed, my mother would go to the well, fill up 2 pails of water, bring it back to the house. We drank from this, and it was also used for cooking and washing and so forth. That's one item, as I remember. We did not have grocery stores or supermarkets as you may visualize them today. So, as a result, we grew our own food. As for example, summertime we would rent a field from one of the peasants in the town and grow potatoes. And I remember as children we used to go there during the harvesting of the potatoes and bring food with us and sit on the potato fields, and they were tremendous. While the potatoes were gathered, brought home, and put into what we call a root cellar. Go back to the description of the entry to the house. To the left of it was a cold storage space. No freezer, but it was enclosed so that the heat couldn't reach there. So all the fruit or the potatoes that we collected during that period were kept there, and on these potatoes we'd live almost an entire year. So we had potato soup and potato pancakes and potatoes and potatoes. It was a staple. During the summer also we used to rent a garden space from one of these peasants, and we'd grow pickles, the cucumbers that is. What else did we grow that we could eat? Radishes, carrots, beans, oh yes, string beans, many of them, much string beans. What else? I can't remember, but all sorts of fruits. I don't think we had lettuce, but we did have, yes, cabbages. Cabbages were also grown. So all these staples were collected and put in a root cellar, and with the chickens that were, killed periodically, and the geese in wintertime. That is, wintertime would be before Passover, because then the fat was rendered and so forth and so forth. Springtime. That was our staple. Cucumbers and, yes, milk, butter and cheese and sour cream were all made from the milk from the cow which we had. The milk was taken in pottery jars, and I remember drinking warm milk coming directly from the cow's udder. The milk that we drink today is pasteurized. We didn't know anything about pasteurizing milk, but that milk was taken, and the butterfat was set aside for ultimately to beating into butter. Some of it was used for making sour milk, what you known as yogurt, and the milk we used to have as milk to drink. Milk was cooked with rice for soup. But basically what I'm trying to make a point of is that all of the food that we had was grown by my mother and Abe, who was the big boy of the family, and I don't think he was, he must have been, I don't think he was 15 years old at the time when all this story I'm telling you about was. With the exception of flour. We used to, the peasants who grew wheat and corn and so forth, used to take it to the watermill, which my grandfather had built with my Uncle Max, who never heard of. And that in itself, I'll go back later and make a description of it. And we used to buy the flour And my mother used to bake her own bread. She would bake, it seemed to me, maybe about 6 large loaves, round ones, like slightly smaller than cartwheels. And that bread used to last us, I don't know, whether a week or a month or 2 weeks, whatever it may be. Maybe Javi or Abe can elaborate on that. So the flour, she used to bake the flour, and oh yes, for Friday night, she managed to get white flour. I don't know where the white flour came from, but somebody had it. And she used to bake holly, the white holly. So you see that almost everything was homegrown or home-baked. I also remember that grandfather Nathan was in the United States. We were in Russia. He used to send us dollars, which was given to us in the form of local currency as rubles, so that anything else that we needed, we had so-called rubles to buy. But really, outside of clothing, shoes, I can't think of anything else. Oh yes, kerosene, of course, for the kerosene for the lamps. Everything was homegrown and home utilized. Let's go back to the mill again. As long as we're talking about the town of Lodz, in the beginning I described the water mill being next to the synagogue. Well, it was a beautiful thing. My grandfather and his brothers, I know his sons, Uncle Max, I think I remember. Who else was there? Maybe Yudel, another uncle, because there were 5 or 6 brothers or uncles outside of Uncle John. None of you may remember. You lived in Kings Highway and he died, and Grandpa Nathan. The others were of a different breed. They were workers. Built this water mill. Now, what they did is this. Originally, they had to build a dam about a quarter of a mile from the mill itself. And the dam, the water to generate the wheels which operated the mill was controlled by lifting gates. And then the water would rush down a canal-like ravine into the water mill. Okay. I remember trying to cross these dams on rickety wheels, and it was a frightening thing for a child of my age. Beyond that was also a lot of swamps, and people used to go fishing there and hunting and so forth. But let's go back to the mill. The mill stood on pilings. The pilings were driven into the water. And at this point, let me digress. As I recall the story, and it may have some flaws in it, the pilings were driven into the water with hand-operated leverage hammers. And one day, as I understand it, a peasant sat down to have his lunch on one of the pilings which were being driven. And he pulled up the hammer and tied the rope to another log. And while he was sitting on this log, the rope became loose, the hammer came down and killed him. I think at that time my grandfather had to escape Russia by adopting another name, because he would be held responsible for the death of this peasant, and either winding up in Siberia or possibly executed. I think when he escaped, he took on the name of Furman, and that's how we became Furman, because his brother, who remained in town, I think, had the name of Glassman. But let's go back to the mill. So the mill sat on 6 or 8 of these pilings. They had built a large water wheel. with paddles in it, and this water wheel drove a smaller wheel, and another wheel drove another wheel, which operated two bricks, two large circular stones, and there was a little basket which was actuated, and the grain fell in between the stones, and out came the flour. Upstairs, I think in the later years, and I remember it, they installed a gin mill, that is not making for gin, but to convert cotton, to take the seed out of cotton, clean out the cotton and so forth. It was a very difficult thing to describe. I really a loss of words at this time. And we used to play in this mill. Also, following this line of water down, as the water came through the mill further down, I remember summertime, we used to go way out, still as a child, to go swimming, way upriver. We as children, of course, were naked, but the women wore their nightgowns, what you would call nightgowns, to swim. In that same area, I remember we used to go collecting wild strawberries. So even to this day, as a result, when I eat strawberries or I take fruit, I'm inclined to smell, to get the freshness that I recall as a child that you get in freshly picked and freshly ripened fruit. Unfortunately, in the city, we can't have it because it's kept in warehouses for ripening, and by that time it takes on the smells of the warehouse and the smells of all sorts of food. Those are the things I remember. I suppose as I meander along, other things will come to mind before we go back to the revolution, because after that things became, life became a little harder. For one thing, we couldn't receive any money from the United States because as Russia turned into a revolutionary country, there was no central government that controlled or acted as a controlling factor on normal life. So the money became a problem. But as I said before, I don't think we ever lacked for food. All I do remember at that time, because things were tight, is my mother giving me a slice of buttered bread for lunch, with instructions to eat very slowly and chew it well. And yet, when we came to the United States, we all looked well fed, because I remember people commenting that the greenhorns, as we came to the United States, looked so well fed they couldn't understand with all the problems that Russia had. I presume that those living in the major cities did have a problem, but we living in the small village as we did, where we raised our own food and provided for ourselves, while we did experience a hardship, I don't think we really suffered to the same extent. Let me go again. I want to go back to something that crossed my mind as we review the tape. As I review the tape periodically, we talked about white flour that my mother used to find someplace for Friday night's holly making, which is very, very important. I remember Uncle Abe's bar mitzvah. Nothing like we have here in the United States. The problem was at the time, where will she get enough white flour to make kichlach cookies to serve in the synagogue for his bar mitzvah reception. So I think that for weeks or months, maybe, before his bar mitzvah time, she began to accumulate white flour. And when the bar mitzvah time came, she baked, she made a cookie, she baked cookies, the kind of cookies that if you ever go to Aunt Hobby and go into her glass jar in the kitchen in Great Neck, you will find them. She baked these cookies, and then we crumbled them, crushed them, so that everyone in the synagogue at that time would have a taste of a cookie. And that was already during the hard times. Another point I want to correct when I say that we didn't need very much money except to buy shoes and sew clothing. We didn't go to a store to buy shoes. There was no such thing as a store with ready-made shoes. We had a shoemaker in town, and he made us boots and shoes. So we would go into his place. He would take measurements of our feet, and make us a pair of shoes. It would take several weeks, possibly, I don't know, maybe a week or 2 weeks to make a pair of shoes, or maybe less. But that's how we got shoes. Stockings were knit, with 4 needles. That's how stockings were made. Clothing was made the same way. I think there was, in one of the general stores in town, a man would bring in from one of the largest cities nearby bolts of cloth, and she would go to the store and buy the necessary number of yards, whether it was 3 yards or 2 yards or some such thing, and the tailor would fit us and make our clothes for us. And I assure you that each of these things, whether it was a pair of shoes or a new pair of pants, was a major event. That describes pretty well, as I recall, part of our daily life in the town of Lelsitz. And this existed, as I said before, until the Polish soldiers came into town. What had happened was that the entire area, Russia was in revolt against the Tsars, and I suppose the Polish people were in revolt against their king, I don't know, but there were many wealthy Polish people. And among the soldiers who did come to stay in our town, I am going to talk about a troop of Polish cavalry, a troop, I should say, of Polish cavalry. To my recollection, there were 8 or 10 men in the troop, maybe 12, over whom there was a sergeant. His name was Novak, that I can remember. In size, he was a 5x5, muscular, typical sergeant material, rough, ready, and always had not a whip, but I guess a lariat with a whip of sort over his arm, and he supervised these soldiers. These boys, and they were boys, I don't think many of them were much more than the early 20s or the late teens, were sons of wealthy landowners who banded in a voluntary group to fight communism. And they were very well dressed. They had beautiful horses, well shod. They themselves had the typical dramatic uniforms that you might have seen in movies or in pictures, where they wore these very tight-fitting uniforms with little short jackets over their left shoulder, with long sabers, cavalry-type sabers. A very handsome group of men. And it was our good luck, I should say, because it could have been just worked against us. They were assigned to live in our house. I'll think back to what I tried to describe back in the house when I mentioned the dining room, or which was off the living room, off the kitchen. It was a large room, and all of this troop was assigned to sleep in that large room, and they did, with army cots and so forth and so on. Of course, we as three boys and my brother, three boys and my mother, slept in the bedroom adjacent to that room, and Javi, who was a young girl at the time, slept somewhere else. She will probably tell you where. I know she stayed at some other house. Nevertheless, these were well-educated men from good families, wealthy families, in a gentlemanly, behaved as, all told, as gentlemen, because they had a good background and good breeding. And this was our good fortune, because soldiers and cavalry troops from other areas or other troops, having been stationed in other homes, did not behave in the same fashion. Now, what is that? What am I referring to? Oh, by the way, I remember when they used to go out on a what shall I say? I remember when they used to go out on guard, to do guard duty or to do some, I don't know, supervision or whatever it may be, and I knew they would be out of the house for a full day. I used to go into their room and sneak some of their bullets, remove the head, pour out the powder and ignite it, play with their machine gun. We had a machine gun in the house as well. This was just aside from anything else. They were also very good to us. Having been brought up well, they didn't particularly care for the army food that was served to them from the army rolling kitchens, which consisted mainly, I suppose, of pork and beans or whatever it was. So whenever their mood struck them for some fresh beef, they would decide to go hunting at night. What hunting involved was this: when taps were blown over the town for lights out, such as they were, we always knew that they wouldn't turn in, but they would sit around in their clothes. One of them had a little harmonica, and they would play harmonica and so forth. When they felt that the town was completely asleep, they would sneak out, go somewheres among the outside of town where the farmers had cattle, and they would steal whatever they could, sometimes a calf, sometimes a pig. If it was a calf, they would steal it and bring it home alive. Across the street from us was a sheikhet, a slaughterer, a ritual slaughterer. And they would bring it to him, he would kill it, to make it kosher. As a result, we would have meat, kosher meat to eat, because to eat non-kosher meat was unthinkable. And for them, they had fresh meat, which my mother subsequently would cook for them. Uncle Abe used to skin it, and I think one or two occasions he saved the skin and I don't know, made some of the boots out of it or something like that. But the fact remains that they were thoughtful enough and considerate enough to kill the animal kosher so we would have food. If they caught a pig, they would slit his throat, bring it to the house, and my mother would cook it for them. We had no choice in the matter. but she had special pots in which she would cook this pork for them, and this is why I say that they were considerate and nice. I remember one incident. They were sitting around the table eating, whether it was the pig that they stole or the calf, whatever it was, which had been just cooked for them for lunch, and the peasant from whom it was stolen came storming into the house, screaming and accusing these soldiers of having stolen his animal. Nobody said anything, nobody did anything, but this sergeant who supervised, who's in charge of the troop, who had his whip with him, just got up from the table and he began to beat this poor peasant and beat him out of the house. And this was, again, it's another side of their military life. They were also very good to us for another reason, because periodically people in the streets would be grabbed to do work for the soldiers, peel potatoes or clean stables or whatever had to be done for the soldiers. We as children were never molested by the other soldiers because they knew somehow that we belonged to this troop. And I don't think, I know I never did, I was never taken off the street, I was too young. But I don't think Max or Abe, who might have been, ever were for that reason. Another incident of things that happened during that time, as I recall, as long as we're on this particular subject. I told you, Grandpa had always, like most of us, had over the years, when he lived in Kiev, had bought some silverware jewelry, nothing of tremendous value, but it was our own, it was mother's jewelry, or rings, or silverware, whatever it was. And during when things became restless and the revolution was on, I think she put everything in a metal box. And it was buried in the stable under the manure. In back of the stable, underground, on the manure. We knew where it was. One day, I think, again, as I tell this story, there may be variations, there may be changes. I'm only telling it as I remember it of a child under 10 years old. And I'm putting myself at 10 because I was 10 when we came to the United States, and we traveled sometimes between May, June, July, August, September. Yes, we traveled about 5 months before we came to the United States. At least 5 months. So, again, I say all of these things I remember as memory would be of a child under 10 years old. And I suppose my memory now, as I think back, it seems fairly accurate. Anyway, one day a colonel or some high official came to our town and they were looking for a place to put him up. Well, nothing suited him, but he wanted our stable, which meant that the troop would be dislodged, and he would come in with his officers and his, everybody else and take over. Well, this troop was, apparently this must have been very, very important people, because this colonel, whoever he was, couldn't arbitrarily say, get out because I'm going to take the house over. So he said that he wanted the place because the stable which housed the horses was drafty, and consequently they should find themselves a new place to live, after which I suppose he would be taken over. Well, everybody knew what he had in mind, so to offset his argument, our troop, I say my troop, our troop, went out on the street, collected a lot of men who were walking loose, whatever they were, whoever were, with instructions to collect all the manure in the stable and line the outside of the stable to keep the wind out, to block the wind out. Oh, by the way, there's another point I wanted to make earlier. As far as the town itself is concerned, you must remember that all the houses in the towns were made of wood. There was no thing as stone or brick or stucco or anything else. The houses were made of wood, log cabin type, large and small. So consequently there was, I suppose, chinks between the logs, which blew cold air into the stable, so that by collecting the manure from the inside the stable, the walls were lined, and therefore the stables were made warm and comfortable, and that was, therefore this colonel had no further excuse to take our boys away from us. But there was one problem. We knew where the box of jewelry was buried, and we were afraid that some strangers were digging for manure in that corner would find the box. So as I recall, I think it was Max and Abe who dug within that particular area, and somehow they dug up the box and very carefully managed to hide it and take it out of the stable so it wouldn't fall into treating us as a family. I said before, they weren't very particularly fond of army food, and periodically many of the soldiers demanded of their hostesses, let's say, the people where they were bivouacked. See, there was no barracks there, but the soldiers came in town, and each troop was assigned to a house, and would demand that the local people very often cooked for them, whether meat or whatever they got from their own canteens or whatever the case would be. It didn't make a difference what the occasion was. When they wanted it cooked, the woman of the house, or whoever it was there, cooked for them. The soldiers in our house were very considerate. I don't recall that they ever demanded my mother to cook for them on a Sabbath, Shabbos, or on a holiday. Now, it's a comment worthwhile making. Bearing in mind that the Polish people were always anti-Semitic, bearing in mind that this was wartime, bearing in mind that this was a troop of men who left their comforts of their homes, and I think from what I recall, and I think Javi may know something more about it, left comfortable homes, stately mansions and estates, so that they could have very well have been very spoiled, and I imagine in their own way they might have been spoiled. Yet they were considerate of the fact that he was a lonely woman with 3 children at home, realizing that she was suffering, not only from being alone as she was, but also because of wartime conditions. I don't remember, and I think it was commented that she was ever called upon to cook for them during, any occasion that would be a holiday for us. This was something worthwhile mentioning. I don't remember now what the military situation developed that this troop was called away and that the Polish soldiers stationed in our town were withdrawn. It was some military situation. It could have been the uprising of the Kerenskys and the Petulovs, or the so-called military barons that were trying to establish a communistic regime in Russia. It could have been that, but I don't remember when they disappeared. But from that time on, I said there was a certain amount of unrest, and things were considerably different. I do remember, though, that one day a man came into town, and he was sent by people in the United States, one of whom was my father, Grandpa Nathan, to collect families like our own, had to be taken by them and supervised by them on their trip from Russia to the United States. It was necessary because Russia did not exist as an entity, as a recognized government, and there were consequently many problems, passport situations and travel problems, particularly so that there were soldiers of all kinds moving in all directions without any guidance because the war was still on. It was a revolutionary situation. It was only recently that I learned that this man had advertised in the forwards, and I learned it from Grandpa Nathan. And I think Uncle Usher could possibly elaborate more on this. That he was coming to this part of Russia to bring people back to the United States if they had visas and whatever it would be. And Grandpa Nathan was one of the men who subscribed to it. And this man came, we received a letter from him that he was coming into town and that we should be prepared to leave at the time that he comes in. Well, as I recall it, my mother killed whatever chickens or geese we had at the time, or whatever bread, and prepared for a long journey to the United States. We took with us our bedding. Furniture and house was left behind. I remember getting on a wagon, leaving the town of Lelzitz. From Lelzitz, I think we went to, I don't know where we went, but we traveled westward. Where else we stopped, I don't know. But my first major town that I remember was the town of Pinsk. Pinsk was a very, very large city. On a map it might be located somewheres opposite Warsaw, on the Polish side of the border. It was from Pinsk where we had many experiences, rather in Pinsk where we had many experiences. One of the earliest ones I remember is that we slept for the first time in many, many weeks. We slept indoors. We were somehow, this man who was guiding us had us placed with a family, a Jewish home. I think we slept in an attic of some sort. I remember, but for the first time I really seen automobiles on the street. And for the first time I saw electricity. I didn't know what electricity was. I didn't know it was electricity. All I knew, it was something that lit up in a small bulb and without kerosene. And I remember asking Max, how did the kerosene come down the tube into the glass without breaking the glass when the fire went on? It was after some asking of questions I learned the story of electricity. I also remember that Uncle Abe was picked up by soldiers with a troop of people, other people, used to drive cattle to another town. You can imagine our position when we learned this, that we were supposed to leave Pinsk for the United States shortly, by way of Poland, by way of Warsaw. And if once Abe was taken away from us, we probably would never see him again. I think Javi had a gold expansion bracelet, which she had received from one of her birthdays from Grandpa Nathan from the United States. And that was given as a bribe to the soldier to leave Abe alone so that he could stay with us. Pinsk to Warsaw, which is where we went on a way to the United States by way of Pinsk, Warsaw, Danzig. In itself carries very vivid memories to me. This portion of the story should really be told by Javi or the boys, as Abe or Max. They being older might remember more details. But as I'm making this tape here in Florida and there in New York, and so from Brooklyn and New York and so forth, I must just draw on things as I remember them. As a child, I wasn't consulted. Whatever I remember is things I remember hearing spoken. And I think I absorb these things more by the process of, what's that technical word, osmosis, than anything that was imprinted on my brain. It does come back as I make these dictations. It was after some days staying in Pinsk that we were able to leave Pinsk for Warsaw. I remember being told, or not that we were told, I remembered that we were traveled on an open, flat car between these two cities. I also remember that on one of the man who guided us, and by the way, I understand only recently that Uncle Usher at the time, was the assistant or acted as an aide to this man, and he probably knows more about it than I can tell you. That they managed to bribe some local officers to put a small cannon on this freight car, with instructions that the freight car was not to be disengaged from the train itself until it reached the Polish border. And on this open, flat car, we left Pinsk. I remember at night, that night I believe, Pinsk was attacked or sacked because the town was burning, and we saw the reflected burning into the reflection of the burnings of the town in the sky, which probably was attacked or sacked by some other military band or God knows what. Anyway, we as children and the women were on this flat car traveling in the open towards Warsaw. I think at that time, of course we had food, but the women must have had water with them. But after a while there was no water, and my memory is very, very vague on this, but I remember that whenever the train stopped for water for the engine, we as children used to jump off the train, and alongside the railroad right away there were cisterns, wells, small wells dug into the ground at various distances. We would collect water in pitchers or jars or whatever was available, and of course they were covered with little wiggly small bugs and so forth. And I think what the women did on board this train was to boil the water so that we'd have that water to drink. We had no undue accidents where soldiers might have, out of curiosity, seeing a group of women and children on a train, Prosa train, God knows what might have happened, but nothing actually did, I do believe, until we reached the Polish border. The
city where we landed was Warsaw. It must have been the outskirts of Warsaw. There must have been near the ghetto section or the Jewish section of the town, and we were guided to a family where we were put up to await the trip from Poland to Danzig. That was the first time, by the way, where we experienced two things that are worth mentioning. For one thing, Warsaw was a big city, an exciting city to me. Cobblestones, tall buildings, very exciting stores with toys and things that would interest a child. Also, they did have an indoor toilet inside the house with a flush box. And to this day, I am looking for the taste that I had of the early Polish ice cream, or more something that was a mixture of ice cream and ices. And I remember they used to be sold from little push carts, and these men would walk through the streets hawking this thing. And that was the first time I had whatever it was, whether it's ice cream or ices. Prior to that, it was unknown to me. And to this day, I cannot forget the taste. We have a joke in the house that every time I eat ices or ice cream, my mind reverts back to the taste that I had from my first bite of the so-called Polish morożina, or morozina, I don't know how it's pronounced. It was in Warsaw that we found that Polish passports were arranged for us, I imagine, by this man who was our guide. You know, thinking back the whole thing as we left the town on a wagon with a track towards the United States by way of through the Russian-Polish area. I'm trying to think of the pictures we see of early Americans leaving the comforts of their homes in Philadelphia and Boston and trekking west through an unknown wilderness on the wagons and facing various hardships. Yes, we did have hardships, not from Indians or not from even from the local soldiers, but in itself it was a frightening experience because since there was no civil government, everything was done. I imagine every step of the way was subject to bribes and dealing with petty local officials. I don't remember how long we stayed in Warsaw, but ultimately, I think by train, we left Warsaw for Danzig. Poor Abe, the trains were naturally crowded, really mobbed. We got on there, I don't know how, but we were out there. Seats were premium, and Abe, the big boy Abe, at the time had everything that we owned, silverware and the jewelry we talked about before, and the bedding, and I don't know what else we had, in a large sack which he carried over his shoulder. He couldn't get a seat. He was standing in the vestibule of the train. It was like an overnight ride, or maybe a little longer. And he had it on a train, and he held on to the mouth of the bag with both hands. And when he woke up the following morning, his hands were still grasping a non-existent bag. During the night, either someone just pulled the bag out of his hands and he wasn't aware of it, or it fell off and someone picked it up, but everything that we owned and carried with us from the time we left the town, Russia, went by the board. In Danzig, we were herded not into the town itself, which was the best thing they could have done. It seemed that the town of Danzig, which is now known as Gdynia, by the way, was a jumping off spot for all immigrants going to the United States. The town itself, of course, was poor. Germany was a war-torn town, although it was very neat and clean. Food was really a premium, and these hundreds and hundreds of, I won't call us refugees, but immigrants, having traveled for so many weeks without proper baths or washing or clothing, were pouring into the town at a tremendous rate. To avoid the town being contaminated, all immigrants were put on a small military island off the mainland, and we slept in tents for cleaning before we were permitted to come into the town. The way it was done is as follows. We were given a place to sleep with straw. We as young boys and men had our hair cut immediately down to the scalp. Our clothes taken and put into kettles for delousing. Women, with the women, they were a little bit more generous. They gave the women combs and kerosene for them to wash the lice out of their hair, and if it passed inspection that they were deloused, we were permitted to leave these open air barracks, open air open air camp, and permitted to, or taken rather, into indoor barracks in the town of Gdynia or Danzig, where we, again, were given straw pallets and slept on the floors while we were waiting for a ship which was probably prearranged at the time. We had to provide for our own food. And the food that was available to us with American money, I don't know where my mother got it from. She must have accumulated it, or maybe it was given to this man who guided us. Anyway, the food that was available to us was to be brought in the town itself, was pumpernickel and sardines. Also, that was pumpernickel and sardines. And after we had pumpernickel and sardines, we had more pumpernickel and sardines. But somehow my mother managed to do two things for me. I think she did the same thing for the boy, the other, Abe and Max. But I remember she bought me a pair of yellow shoes with buttons, and she bought me a harmonica. At this point in the narrative, I must stop, because we are now in Danzig. We're going to board the steamer for the United States. There are many things that I personally remember about the trip itself. But before doing that, for the purpose as a record, I would like to have added into this narrative things that I absolutely do not recall, both by Javi, Uncle Abe, and or Max, and Usher. As for example, in the experiences in the early days in Lelsitz, I think Javi could add about her early experience as a young girl in town, because I remember she used to go out with boys who, of all things, smoked on Friday night. Unheard of. They were big boys already at the time, especially in a religious town. She could tell us about the theatrical company that was formed in the town to play Jewish theater. I also remember that we had a beautiful clock which had beautiful chimes, chimed the hour and a half hour, which was used on the stage. Unfortunately, I was too young a child to be taken to see one of the plays, which was the Dibuk, And that's a very, very famous, prominent Jewish play where the devil enters the body of a soul of an individual, and the rabbis, shall we say, exorcise it out of it and so forth. That's the theme of the story. Many other little experiences of life in the town, which, as I said before, I was too young to really absorb, and I think whatever I've absorbed or remembered was more in the nature of a, what's the word I used before? Anyway, just absorbed. Abe could tell us about his experience, and I remember one that he had to row a boat with people for some miles. He was still a kid at the time. He could tell us about the winter days when we used a horse and a sled to go out into the woods and cut the wood for firewood, bring it back, and saw it into logs, which we used to, burn for heating and cooking, of course. Max, I think, already was a student studying Gemara. He was advanced further than I was. All of these things are germane, I think, to the story, both for experiences and memories that took place as part of our life in the old town. That's interesting. But more interesting is, I wish we could get a hold of Usher, and I'll do my best to get this tape over to him, to tell us of the experiences that he lived through in getting this gaggle, or this group of immigrants, as we were, through the various towns, Russia towns, of course, and also the experiences in Pinsk, and the travel, the arrangements made for the flat car, and the arrangements in Warsaw and so forth, because I do remember, not that I remember, I just learned recently that he was a right-hand man to this man who guided us. Strange as it may seem, I don't remember Usher until we were on board the ship. And I remember the ship, of course, was the Susquehanna. And I don't think I ever met, and I don't remember having met, the man who guided us. Now, that part of the story is really very, very interesting, because they must have had difficult times to make all those arrangements, and he would know. As I said, I'm leaving this on the tape at this point as a memo, which I would like to go back, to add onto the tape before we go on board ship. The trip itself took 3 weeks. We got here, and after that, of course, we're back in the United States. There are many things to talk about, but that is not the purpose of the tape itself. I'm only, as I said at the very beginning, I'm preparing this tape so that our grandchildren, and even our children, can have some idea as to where we came from and who we were. At this point, I'll leave the matters right until I can add what I really feel is very, very important into this narrative.
How we left Lelchit suddenly.
Yep.
And one night came a messenger from Pinsk that there is a delegate came with money that my father sent to take us all to the United States. But we must come to him. And how shall we go to him? So I went, and our friend, Hoffman Moshe, we both went out in the middle of the night, and he said, I know where the German people live, and they have big wagons. And there was a few more couples that they also had money and had a message from their husbands that from the man that their husbands wants them to the country, to United States. They should come. So we went and we hired the wagons, the farmers, and we took all the bundles, whatever we were able to take, some food, some clothing, and the rest of them, and we put all the small children on the wagons. And ourselves, the bigger children and the older people, had to walk and just follow the wagons, and just follow the wagons. And it was all done in the middle of the night. Nobody should see how we leave the country. And then when we came to a certain place where we were able to come to, we had to come to Pinsk. So we were walking until we came to the place where the trains took us over to Pinsk. And when we came there already, we figured we are safe now. So of course we stayed there, I don't know how long we stayed there in Pinsk, but a couple of weeks, till we found out that our delegate is in Warsaw, and he has money there, and we have to come to Warsaw. So then we went to the trains.
Press the button.
So the same delegate made sure he arranged the trains for all the passengers that came from Lelchitz and around where else he had the arrangement. And we start going to Warsaw. And that's how we came to Warsaw. The trip wasn't such a pleasant, but thanks God we arrived alive. We met on the way a lot of disturbance. They called them Poznanchikis. You know, they cut the beards from the old man, and they gave us plenty of trouble, but we figured whatever it will be, thank God we arrived alive to Warsaw. There when we came, so we went to the hotels.
Who took you to the hotel?
Who took us to the hotel? We must have had a guide that came for...
That's what I was.
Yeah, we had that guy that came for us.
Who was the guide?
Yeah, Oscar Levin, yeah. But he worked through a young boy, another young boy, that he was very young. That was Zaretsky's, made them, what's her name? Leia. Bei uns hat geschickt a Boychik, a young kid, a young boy. He was maybe that time, but 16, 18 years. Landsman, a Boychik, and that boy was the whole thing, bring us together. Because to send the regular men, they couldn't. They were afraid they would catch them. And he, as a kid, sneaked through, and he came in time there, and he brought us there, where Oscar Levin, our delegate, Oscar Levin, arranged the hotels and the places where to sleep and where.
We stayed at a hotel in Warsaw. We stayed in a private house.
We stood at 18th for San Francisco.
No, we stayed in a house. We stayed in a private house.
So, 20th Francisco Street, for Warsaw.
Yeah.
I know,
Same.
I don't remember what it was.
20th Francisco Street, gas.
20 Francisco Street.
It was a private house.
It's a private, because I know it was a private house.
Yeah.
And from there, we tried to locate the delegate,
Hotel Handlowa,
and he was in hotel Handlowa in Warsaw.
14 other.
Yeah, 14 Alvike, that's not a, yeah, he remembers more of that. And on the next day, I went to look for that delegate of ours. And when I came there, I didn't find the delegate. He was busy arranging our trip for further to Danzig, for passports, for everything. So I found a landsman from Petrico. That's my husband now. I asked a Spitalnik, Osher. He took the place of the delegate, and he took care.
Secretary.
Yeah, he took care on the money. He wasn't able to give me money, but he watched the money. He watched He spoke to whoever came and gave them information. And then from there already, he told when the delegate came, he told them that I was there and we have money. And when I came, he said, yes, you have money, your father sent you plenty of money, and I have to take you further. And that's how we went on. So we waited. We had already money to buy food, to stay, to eat, to do things a little, to come out to ourselves, to see Warsaw, how it looks. And we were waiting for our passports. And when the passports got...
You guys had a Polish passport, don't forget.
Yeah, no, of course.
You could tell it,
Yeah.
the way it is.
We had to get Polish passports because our passports were lost in Russia.
There was no Russia.
No Russia no more. So,
You gotta tell it the way it is, so that,
yeah.
just the way it took place.
So we had to get different passports from a different city, and that was in Poland, in Warsaw. And we had to wait there. And there we waited quite a while till we got it. And finally, when we got these passports, we had to move to Danzig. And there already we felt that we are more free. We are already on our own, we're free, and nobody will touch us. But they put us in barracks. We slept all on the floor in barracks, on the tents. We ate, we had to buy our own food, but we let ourselves a little more free to do things and to go places and see the city and see everything. And after that, of course, till we lived to it, to get to see the passports, they had to put us on the boats. But what shall I give it to him?
Boat was Susquehanna.
Yeah, and we had such a beautiful boat. 21 days we traveled on that boat. The name of the boat, nobody knew before, Susquehanna. They used to, they say they used to carry cattle on these boats, not people. But we were worse than cattle there.
Remember the French fries, the French
Yeah.
toast they made for us?
Yeah, we were very sick. All of us was very sick. My brothers, myself, my mother was so sick that I had to take her there in the hospital. That's how sick she was on that boat, and for the 21 days. But thank God we arrived in place where we had to my father in United States. And then,
Okay, put them on.
yeah.
Javi gave us a little background of what took place up to a point. It's open. Up to a point. Now we'll put Usher on, give us his impressions, and then later on we'll splice the two tapes. Splice it all together into one tape, and I'll make some cassettes out of it. We'll give it to the kids, so at least the kids will know where we came from and how we got here. Usher's on the phone now.
No.
If you press this, it'll stop. Just hold it and talk.
This will stop, yeah. But
I bring.
Well, children, now it's my next to tell you how I came to this country, and at the same time how I met your aunt, Javi, and how we lived over entire time.
Your mother and grandmother.
Yeah, and mother and everybody. I left Petrkov was July 3rd on a Shabbos. I remember distinctly it was Shabbos. And we had to walk 21 miles to get a train in order to go to Pinsk. We did not know that the delegate, Osher Levin, which was his name at that time, we did not know that he's in Pinsk. But he came direct to Petrkov and he took us to Pinsk. In Pinsk, we met already all the immigrants from Lelchitz and from other cities, I would say, Petrkov and Lelchitz. I believe we were about more than 70 people altogether, the wives and the children. And to tell you how we lived, we cannot tell you. You have to overlive that. Well, I believe Hitler's time was just actually like that. I remember one time in Pinsk. We were together, all the boys. We were about 12 or 13 boys together, and we had to go eat a dinner. And in Pinsk, the delegate took us out for a dinner in a hotel. And we came there to eat, and right away came police. What are you doing together? You know very well that you are not supposed to be 12, 13 people. It's against the law to have like a meeting. We tell him that we are immigrants. We're going to America. And they put the guns against us towards the wall. And we thought that we're going to be shot right away. But thank God, with the pool of the delegate that he paid to the government of Polish people, a nice couple of hundreds of marks, whatever, or dollar bills, American, and we were saved. And that's the way we lived until we came to Warsaw. Warsaw, we overlived again. At that time, they pulled like boys my age to work. They grabbed them in the street. They looked them in the hotels, and they grabbed them. We had to hide, every one of us. And we overlived in Warsaw. I believe we lived there a nice couple of weeks. And until the delegate bought for us the false, I would say, documents.
How did you get from Pinsk to Warsaw?
We had our own train. The delegate, Oscar Levin, had a train that, in fact, we lived in that train, I believe, a couple of weeks. We slept in the train all together, and we lived there, and we ate there and everything. But occasional, he used to take us out, and then when it happened, that accident that they had to pay a nice couple of $100 to save our lives. Since then, we slept there again until we came to Warsaw. And it wasn't so easy to come to Warsaw. We had to, like boys like me, in the 20 years or more or less, we had to hide between the women. Actually, in the train, our faces couldn't stay up because the Polish, they grabbed us for work, they hit us, they do anything. They hate the Jews, especially the young Jews. So that's the way we lived, and we came to Warsaw. We came to Warsaw, and over there wasn't so pleasant neither. At nights, sometimes they were looking in the hotels. We were also the same as, and Javi said, that we were in a private house. And then from the private house, we went to the hotel Handlowa, 14 Naliovki. It's well known in Warsaw. And we stood there a nice couple of weeks. And it cost the delegate plenty money to save our lives over there. Nights that they used to make look for us. Huh? Search the young people, especially when the Russian were after the Polish from Moscow till Warsaw in a short time, just as the Polish were running away from the Russian were running away from the Polish until Moscow. So from Moscow, the communists, they begin to hit the Polish till Warsaw. And from Warsaw, we had to buy Mr. Levin, Oscar Levin, the delegate. He bought for us false passports. We had to be Polish. And I remember it was a girl that she brought us the documents, the passports, and he paid plenty money for it, and we were saved to go to Danzig. And believe me, when we came to Danzig, it was a different country, was Germany. It's not the Germany that today. It was a Germany, special Germany. It was gentlemen.
Tell us the way it is.
Yeah. How did I no Javi. Well, Javi came for money to the delegate, and she didn't find him, as she said before, and she found me, and she asked me if there is money that her father sent for the family. I says, yes, there are money for you, but I cannot give you big money. I'm here. I could give you maybe $25 or maybe 50, but I cannot give you all the money because I'm not permitted. I was his secretary to watch the money and to put on records who comes to ask every immigrant who came for money that the husband or father or family, other family, sister or brother sent. That was my job to mark down this one or that one was here today. And Javi came and I told her, well, I had that friends. We were about 12 or 13 boys. So as soon she came, then I met my friends. They say, oh, you know the Javi, she's a good-looking girl. I says, yes, I met a good-looking girl, and I'm taking her out tomorrow night to a movies. And I went with her to a movies in Warsaw. And that's the way we met, and that's the way it accumulated that when we came to Danzig, I didn't let her go. But when we came on, she went on a different boat, which it was Susquehanna. I went on a boat by the name New Rochelle. We were both of us on 21 days each on different boats. But on our boat, they said that Susquehanna was drowned. On Susquehanna was said that our boat was sunk. But thank God, every Yom Kippur, we came to this country. That was September 20th. From July 20th to September 20th, we were on the way. We could stay, we'll stay 5-10 minutes more.
That's up to you.
Kippur, we came to United States, and it's understandable that every one of us went to look for his landslide. And after Yom Kippur comes Sukkot, and Sukkot time, the religious people who was in America, they did not work holiday, and they went to see, everybody went to see their friends. I, as in Europe, in my city, I didn't have no job. I didn't have no trade at all. But when I came to this country and we began to walk and to go to friends, I decided to become a butcher. And I became a butcher. Finally, I became a butcher and I met some Yelchitz people, like Mama's Aunt Javi said before, Mesha Hoffman. She went out with him that night to look and find where to go. The same Moshe Hoffman was a neighbor to me in the same street, and he became a butcher. And as I knew that he was a Yelchitzer bocher, I said to him, how could I find Javi? I like to see Javi. So we began to look for Javi. He didn't know, and I did not know. But I had an aunt. She had a hardware store. And all the immigrants who came from Lechitz, Petrico, they used to come to buy from her, like dishes, teplach, everything, because they had to buy something, they had to cook for the families and everything. So I came to my aunt and I said, do you know Lechitz people? She says, yes. I said, they're a family of Furman, Nathan Furman. He brought his wife and his family, and I'm looking for the daughter, Javi. She said, well, very easy. And she gave me an address to an uncle, Max. that he used to live in Brooklyn in Howard Avenue near Pitkin. And in a Friday, while I was working already, Friday I used to work only till 12 o'clock. And 12 o'clock, I took that friend Moshe, and we were walking, where is that, Howard Avenue? We found Howard Avenue and Pitkin, and we came to Uncle Max's house Friday afternoon, late afternoon. And when I opened the door, and the uncle was alive, Tante was alive, and she was religious. And she had on her table like holly, Shabbos holly, and Shabbos candles and everything. And I was surprised in America to see that way. And I asked her, where is Javi? She says, Javi was supposed to come for today here, for this weekend, but she did not come, and she'll be here next week. And I was waiting next week, and I met Javi, and Javi told me that they are moving soon. At that time was Bronzeville section, Brooklyn, and they really moved in, and that's the way I began to go to Javi, and I went until,
Then that's how my life started.
and that's the way
My trouble started.
The ball bounces.
I went there, and in fact I was already, in fact that I moved in already to the house, and we were up till the wedding. Then, to tell you that what had happened wasn't so pleasant. She lost her mother, and we got married after she lost her mother, and Pop got remarried to a very nice woman, which we think about her very much. She was nice to everybody, to the children, and she was nice to him. And that's the way we went our life until today.
Okay.